introduction of our audience members in attendance. And we'll start, Logan has someone to introduce from MPO and City of Missoula staff.
Hi everyone. I'd like to introduce Kim Hutchinson as the new Transportation Program Assistant.
Great. Welcome, Kim. We're happy to have you on board. So we'll just go around. Dick, you want to start us off and make sure we get names and affiliations slowly for the record.
Dick Ainsworth, Planning Board Representative. Probably be the last time you'll see my smiling face. My term on the Planning Board is up at the end of the year, and I'm not going to re-up. But I've enjoyed this and the Planning Board.
Garen Smith, Board of Health. This will probably be my last time, too. I'm rotating off the board from term limits. I've only been on there 25 years, and they're rotating me off.
Jean Curtis, I represent the County Commission, and I'd like to thank both of you for your public service.
Yeah, thank you as well. Jordan Hess, City Council.
Dave Stromeyer, County Commissioner, and also you still can come to these meetings even if you don't have to.
John Ingan, Mayor of the City of Missoula. Apparently I'm not going anywhere. But yeah, thank you, gentlemen. That's a thing.
Don MacArthur, Missoula Urban Transportation District.
Ed Taves, MDT.
Dave Gray, MPO Transportation Planner.
Okay. And members of the audience? Great, thanks everyone. We have minutes from November 21st, 2017. I'd entertain a motion to approve those.
So moved. Second.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded by, okay. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Public comment? All those in favor of approval of the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. Okay, the motion passes and those will stand approved. Is there public comment on items not listed on our agenda? Come on up to the microphone.
All right. Thank you very much for your service and the time to get a chance to just talk to you for a minute. The reason I'm here is I actually have been pleased with the engagement of the committee's activities on Facebook, and it was nice to hear of the meeting today and going over the safety standards. And one area I wanted to briefly speak to you about and also ask your advice on is crosswalk safety here in the City of Missoula, and I'm sure it exists in the county as well. I am a parent of some high school students who don't have driver's licenses yet, so I still take them to school each day. I live in Lower Miller Creek, and I make the trip from Lower Miller Creek to Sentinel High School, and then I make it back past Meadow Hill. And then I also go past our new school that's being built. And I have concerns in each area, and I won't go deeply into them, just briefly. But what I'm finding is that each day when I go, almost every day, I'm seeing near misses with our kids. Just kids that are not my children, but kids that are trying to get across there. And I wanted to simply make an ask of you in terms of how to address it as a citizen. And I have ideas. I'm actually a software engineer by profession. So therefore, my mind goes to the technical side of this, whether it be flashing beacons, motion detection, and so forth. But I certainly know that there's a cost to it as well. And from the cost side, it's interesting because I have a child who's in, one of my kids is in Sentinel Dec, and they're always looking for projects. And I keep thinking, interesting, right in front of the high school is something that needs some assistance, and they are always looking for ways to raise money and to get things done. So therefore, I guess I wanted to come first today and make a comment about the topic. Secondly, I am going to pursue this with the bicycle and pedestrian office here in town as well. But I also just simply wanted to raise it as an issue if someone had not already, I'm sure they have, on this. And just the fact that I believe that the solutions are out there, and it's a matter of trying to see where can I plug in, or where can we come together to find the solutions to get some of these implemented. And even just the loss of life we had on Russell just recently, again, it brings me here today. So I just wanted to come and make a comment on that, and I'm very happy to even later hear any feedback you have on how I can jump into that process. So.
Okay. I appreciate your comment, and I'll make sure that we connect after the meeting and get you in touch with the city engineer and the bike ped office, and
Okay.
And we'll keep the conversation going.
Okay.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I
Commissioner
would
Curtis.
just recommend that you also visit with the school district, because the school
Okay.
district has a certain amount of responsibility at children getting to and from school.
That's what I wondered, especially with the construction of the new school. I've been in touch with Mark Thane about certain things with that, so I didn't know if the streets along there were within their purvey or not. So, okay. Safety is, okay. Thank you.
Great.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any additional public comment? Okay, great. So we have an item of new business, which is adoption of safety performance measures and targets, and Dave Gray's here to introduce that item.
Good afternoon. At your last meeting, we brought forward the federal safety performance measures that we've been working on. Since your meeting, the Transportation Safety Technical Advisory Committee met and approved the methodology that we used in order, when we walked through these charts, how we arrived at that, and agreed that integrating the targets that we came up with would be included in the safety plan update as goals of that plan. Our action item today is regarding adoption and support of the safety targets that have been set forth by the Montana Department of Transportation through their comprehensive highway safety plan. So our safety plan can include local goals, and we're looking at adopting the statewide goals set forth by MDT today. So we have until February 28th to make our decision on which targets we're going to adopt. So we have two choices: either adopt formally the targets that we came up with, or adopt MDT's statewide targets. Right now, staff is recommending adopting the statewide targets, but we'll go through how we arrived at all of that as we go through. So in order to calculate our targets that do support the statewide targets, we had to use the historical and state and projected VMTs, vehicle miles traveled. We needed to project out fatal injuries and incapacitating injuries as a straight number, like how many are there going to be or might there be. Then we also had to project out the rate per 100 million vehicle miles traveled for each one of those. So we developed a trend line, looked at the historical data, developed a trend line, and projected them forward in a nutshell. It was brought up at the last meeting, what about our time spans? And so I'm going to address that. I hope you all have a large sheet like this in front of you, because these are side-by-side time period assessments, same data, different time periods, and you can see what happens to that trend line as we move between the 10-year and the 5-year for each one of these elements. So the 10-year fatal would end up being 3.5 fatalities per year in 2020. using the 10-year projection or historic data. If we use 5 years of historic data, it shows an increase. And obviously that is not supporting the statewide goal of reduction of fatalities in the comprehensive statewide plan. So that's the effect of the trend lines when we start looking at shorter time periods. Now, with incapacitating injuries, the 5-year is a more reasonable target projection. And that's evidenced in that if you look at the 10-year, we've got a whole lot more variability. And the slope, the steepness of that slope puts us down at 16 incapacitating injuries per year in 2020, which is not an attainable goal. The green line on each one of these charts is the 5-year average of each of those. So the green line in the fatal is starting with 2007 and going up to 2011. That's when that 5-year average was able to be calculated. So we were looking at the 5-year average and what projection actually fit that best. So we're looking at decreases across the board. So the 10-year for fatal and the 5-year time span for incapacitating injuries. And we can pause there for a moment and talk about that if we need to. What we're looking for is to be able to, one, use a time frame that supports the statewide targets. Two, within our own safety plan, be able to set goals for our community separate from the performance measures that we want to achieve, that are actually achievable and not completely extraordinary. So reducing it from 72 in 2016 down to 16 in 4 years is not a very achievable goal. And what we'd like to do is set forth goals within the safety plan itself that are reasonable and we can actually see an accomplishment there. Not say we set this incredibly assertive goal and with no real way to ever be able to achieve that. So,
Just stop you for a question there.
Yes.
Mr. Stromeyer.
So there's no problem staff does not see any problems in terms of inconsistency with which time horizon is being used for the analysis to achieve some kind of ideal result?
No. In fact, something to remember is as we move forward, we're going to be adjusting the goals and targets, if you will. I'd like to use them interchangeably, but there's really a problem with that, with the terminology, and that if we choose to accept the targets by the state, we can have internal goals for our local plan. But if we choose to adopt targets, then those are going to supersede the MDT's targets, and it's going to lead by additional reporting by the MPO every year, which isn't a huge deal, but since our numbers are matching up with the states, it's a much more integratable approach. So I know Billings, it sounds like Billings, Great Falls are already accepting the statewide numbers. We have indicated initially that we would probably be doing so, but it's really up to TPCC to make that final decision. But it is the staff recommendation. What's most important is how we arrived at those numbers and how they fit with the 5-year average. So again, the 5-year average is not absolutely necessary to be included with this fatal and incapacitating injury chart. It's really a check to see how our targets are relating to it. So what we want is that red bar to be as close to that 5-year average as possible. So
Commissioner Curtis?
So Dave, I don't see the correlation at all with, on the fatal injuries where you have the two charts. And I can see on the incapacitating that your 5-year chart lines up with the green line going down, but the other one goes up. So what's the difference between the 10-year and the 5-year, and how do you get the red lines going up instead of down? I don't.
Because we were only looking at the numbers between 2012 and 2016 in the 5-year, and that showed an upward trend.
Oh, gotcha.
And using the 10-year,
So
it
you're reflecting
really
trends,
like
right.
gave us something that was more useful.
Okay, thanks.
I know, trend lines and stuff. And there's nothing more joyful than talking about fatal and incapacitating injuries in the holiday season. So the new part is non-motorized. And it gets really tricky because we're working with such small numbers. And we had to get away from the 10-year, we had to get away from the 5-year, and we used 7-year. And the difference between the fatal and incapacitating injuries overall is that for non-motorized, those two groups are clumped together. Because if we didn't clump them together, we wouldn't have enough numbers to actually make any kind of meaningful trend. So what we're suggesting is using a 7-year. So we've got the 10-year for the fatal, the 5-year for the incapacitating, and then a 7-year time span for the non-motorized. And that's what best fits with the 5-year average, again. And I hope that this is somewhat clarifying your question, Dawn, about the time span choices, because we can't just choose one and say we're going to run with it.
So just following up on that, if we had a unusual year this year, does that then skew what do we do with current data as we get it, I guess is the question.
We'll be applying it and looking at it annually.
So every year we take the 5-year horizon for the incapacitating and the 10-year for the fatal. Is that right? Just move it 1 year forward?
That's our plan at the moment.
So what happens if we had if that suddenly changed it to being an upward trend?
I guess we'd have to reevaluate, because ultimately if we're accepting the statewide standards, then we'd have to look and see what we can do. But one way or the other, if we have to adjust the time frame, it's still going to be adjusted based on that 5-year average. So it's going to be, we're going to try to get the best fit on a target that still supports the statewide target. And depending on that time frame, that's really it, because the 5-year average helps equalize that huge fluctuation. So that's what we're looking at. So we may adjust the time frames a little bit, but ultimately it's as long as you're comfortable with the future projection, trying to align as closely as possible with the 5-year average, then we're going to be able to be successful like that. So the difference between the 7-year and the 10-year, that's a pretty big change from the 5-year average.
Mayor Engen?
Thank you. So David, how do targets or goals, whichever we want to use, correlate with planned activities to reduce fatalities and injuries? Do they align?
Well, with the safety plan, we identify emphasis areas. Intersection safety is one of them. So we're always looking at crash data, always. So depending on what the contributing factors are of the crashes, then perhaps we can align highway safety improvement program funds, so safety funds, that sort of thing, toward that, the goal of solving that problem. Does that help? So we're looking at these in different levels. This is for federal requirement.
Right. Yeah. This strikes me as kind of a funky exercise. Particularly if we're not. So I look at MPA, the first chart in the upper left-hand corner. I look at 3.5. I think I'm looking at that without my glasses. 3.5 fatal injuries in 2020.
That's a 5-year average.
Yeah. And we get there strategically through. I'm having a hard time tying the pieces together. I don't think I have to, frankly. I guess I'm more curious than anything what the cause and effect is here.
So the effect would inform our safety plan more than anything else.
So we project 3.5, and that year actual is 10.
Then we need to look and see what's going on.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And down in the middle of that sheet, there's a CTSP, performance versus performance measures, and the CTSP called for a reduction of down to 6 of fatalities by 2018, I believe. And for that 5-year average, we're below that. So we've beaten our goals for the CTSP every year. I mean, we beat them 3 years after we had made those goals. So we're constantly looking at where the problem areas are, and then through that plan and the long-range plan, we will address that.
It seems like in a perfect world, the target and the goal would always be 0, and we'd compare against 0.
Well, and that's one of the things that was brought up at the highway safety plan meeting is the closer you get to 0, the harder it is.
Yeah.
It's that last one.
Right.
And how do you get the last one when we've got so much pass-through traffic? We got people, we're the economic hub of Western Montana, so we can do as much as we possibly can, but there's no accounting for some of it. All right, we can do our best, but 0. Ultimately, the goal is 0.
Right. Yeah. It's an interesting exercise. I will shut up.
Yeah.
I guess I'd like to continue to tease that out a little bit. Are there, with the performance measures, or is there performance-based funding, or are there federal incentives through funding or through allocation of highway safety improvement funds, or is there anything that rewards us for meeting our goals or challenges us to reach beyond our goals?
Well, the MPO is, there's no adverse penalty for the MPO, but if no movement is made on, and the state numbers, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Ed, I don't know if you're how absolutely familiar you are with that language, but if the state doesn't hit their targets and there hasn't been any significant project application for safety, then they can look at HSIP funding and make sure that HSIP funding gets allocated toward it. So it's not a huge, we don't lose money, but money that would otherwise be going toward other projects may have to be shifted over to HSIP money, HSIP funding. So that would be the thing. It would be HSIP shift at the cost of something else. Does that sound right? Okay.
But HSIP is a competitive funding source, correct? So
Is what?
It's a competitive funding source based on the specific needs of specific problem areas, correct?
And stands for what?
Oh, sorry, Highway Safety Improvement Program, I believe.
Thank you.
Okay, so like using the Reserve Street median barrier as an example, that project scored competitively because there were a higher than acceptable number of fatal or incapacitating accident or crashes there, and then the solution proposed also was competitively scored based on the cost and the benefit.
Right,
So-
and it's really that priority is derived from the crash data.
Okay. Okay.
So there are sticks and no carrots.
So these are number-based. Then we have the rate-based on 100 million VMT. So in 2020, the MPO, the planning area, this is how we need to assess these things now. So basically Fringetown, Evero, Tura, Lolo size space. We're looking at hitting 758 million vehicle miles traveled per year. And we need to use that 100 million to create rates. So our projected, this one actually uses the 5-year average, and I know that gets complicated, it gets weird. Why is it that one is number-based and we're using the 5-year average to make sure that we're not out of whack, and the other one is 5-year average based, and that's all derived using, basically this rate is derived from the previous one, from the absolute number. So we're looking at 0.812 fatalities per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. And we're looking at less than 10 incapacitating injuries per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. What does that mean? So for fatalities, it would it's about 5 fatalities in 2020. We hit 100 million vehicle miles traveled about every 2 months. So that's the real, is about 5 fatalities per year. Then for incapacitating injuries, it's approximately 73 incapacitating injuries in 2020. That's what the 9.5 per 100 million vehicle miles traveled really means. Is that fairly clear? Do you want me to put one of those funky equations back up on this one?
Clear as mud.
We're going to stay away from those. I got us in trouble last time. So on the back side, below that, this is how the targets compare. One, if you should look at annual reduction. We're looking at annual reductions across the board. Some of them are more than MDT, some of them are less, but one way or the other, we account for about 5% of the urban VMT. So any reduction we have is going to support the targets by MDT. That's the thing. The other thing with these is the numbers from these tables, their base year is 2013, our base year is 2016. They're looking at billions of VMT, whereas we're looking at hundreds of millions VMT. So our numbers are drastically different. But that's why I'm saying, look at the annual reduction. That is what we want to see. We want to see a reduction in all of these things across the board. So this stuff will be included in the CTSP. We're going to have this all documented. We need to revamp the structure of the community transportation safety plan because of a geographic change in data assessment. Plus, we want to integrate these performance measures into that document, because right now the methodology that's in it is different. I mean, it's not drastically different. It uses 5-year averages across the board, whereas we're looking at different things here. So that is what I have to say on this. Our recommendation is for TPCC to adopt and support the MDT statewide safety performance measure targets.
Okay. In this this target comparison chart that was on the screen here just a moment ago, I know these are different comparison years, but the fatality rate, the existing fatality rate in the MPO area was 0.85 per 100 million VMT and 1.9 statewide. Is that accurate? That our fatality rate is less than half the state?
The fatality rate for which one?
I'm looking
baseline?
Yeah, so, and like I said, I know they're different years, but in 2013, it appears the MDT fatality rate was 1.9, and this, in 2016, the MPO rate was 0.85, which is, so is it fair to say that our fatality rate is less than half of the statewide average per 100 million VMT or per unit distance? Mm-hmm. I'm reading that correctly? Mm-hmm. Okay. So, and just noting also that our serious injury rate is slightly higher. So I just thought that was kind of interesting.
Right, and that's where the scale of VMT starts playing a factor.
Mr. MacArthur.
So in that MPO target thing, I'm assuming that the far right column should be in percent. Is that right?
Yes.
So that 0.11 is really 11%? Or is it, because it looks like it's 11%, not 0.11%.
I'd have to look at that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Well, the reduction.
Always good to have a scientist around.
I mean, I was just looking.
Yeah, it's not
thing
11% between 2017 and 2020. So no, I don't think so. I think that's 0.1%.
Well, check that out. I think it's 11%. I looked at those numbers and I was like, wow, those are not very much improvement. Mm-hmm. And compared to the state, well, and I was wondering why we were doing worse than the state. And then I was looking at it thinking, no, I think it's really 11%. So maybe my question is, if we adopt the state performance measures, what does that mean for our expectation relative to these trend lines and this MPO targets? Or is that another thing that we're adopting too, that we're expecting to meet the MPO targets? Or are we just trying to meet the percentage reductions that the state shows in the MDT targets?
We're agreeing to adopt and support the statewide targets, and we are in agreement that these goals that we've set forth are appropriate for inclusion in the CTSP. I know that's like, it sounds like it's two different motions, but if it adds clarity that it's two different things. One is the federal requirement for safety performance measures in supporting the MDT targets. The other one is inclusion of these goals that we've shown today into the community transportation safety plan as goals for us to try to meet and address through our emphasis areas within that plan.
And so our local goals change every year depending on this trend lines. Is that true?
It would be, yeah, they have to be updated annually. So, because we have to continue to show that we are supporting the MDT statewide targets.
So if we update it annually and the trend line stops going down to where it's supporting MDT, then we're going to look at a different time horizon to make it where we want it to be.
Well, first, the safety plan allows us to dive deep into the crash data and find out what's going on. That's the one thing, because sometimes you think you're going to do something good and it turns out it didn't do so good. All right, so we need to approach that and find out what's going on. Well, I'm not going to go into that, but so yes, in our annual report for the safety plan, we will be indicating those changes in a target. Maybe we hold it. Maybe it'll stay stable. I hope it continues down the path to oblivion, frankly. But we need to be able to keep our targets realistic and achievable.
So my other question was whether the state, maybe this is a question for you, Ed, but does the state keep urban data? I mean, so Dave, you said something about we're X percentage of the urban miles VMT in the state. Mm-hmm. And so I guess the question is there a way that we could compare these safety data for the rest of the urban part of the state? Is that are those numbers known and the trend lines for those numbers known? I mean, it feels like the problem with Missoula is there's too few incidents to actually have an accurate trend line that we can use as a base. And if we could use the whole of the state of Montana as a starting point for what does that trend line look like in urban settings, maybe it would be a better baseline.
Theoretically.
Yeah, I mean, we have just as Dave's counterparts. I mean, there's data for Great Falls and Billings MPOs. So I mean, those would be the most comparable because we have other urban areas which are over 5,000 population, but I don't know that that's going to be the comparison that you're probably thinking about. I mean, the more comparable areas would be the other two MPOs. I know that we obviously have data for that.
Well, when I got in touch with MDT regarding VMT within the other planning areas of Great Falls and Billings, those numbers have not been run, which led me to the conclusion that since Billings and Great Falls have accepted the targets for MDT, that they haven't done this level of analysis with the intent to include it in their safety plans. So this is our way of updating our safety plan so that we can pinpoint the problem areas while still supporting MDT.
So are they just saying, fatalities, we're going to go for a 2.7% reduction following MDT's targets?
As far as I know, I'm not familiar with their process.
Mayor Engen?
So I would make a motion supporting the staff recommendation. Frankly, this strikes me as an exercise to fulfill need on the part of the federal government, and and we can support MDT in doing that, and I think we proceed hand in glove with our safety plan and the work that MDT does toward Vision Zero, which is the other watchword here, and that's we don't want any fatalities or injuries, and that's we'll proceed accordingly, but we'll engage in this exercise in whatever way makes it work for the feds. Sorry to be blunt.
The motion is in order. Is there a second? Sure.
So should we check the math and make sure, though, that these, because this stuff's going to get put in our plan, right? Because those of us that are up here doing math
Well,
think that one
I can talk
should
to
say
that a little bit.
percents, not points, 0.11.
So we are already looking at a full safety plan update. Up until now, since its adoption, we've just been doing yearly reporting back to MDT saying what we've done, how we've changed the emphasis or the strategies inside the emphasis areas and that sort of thing. With the, so adopting MDT, that's good, those targets. When we start doing the CTSP update, we're going to be bringing a lot of this stuff back. And we'll be approaching some of like the way that we're dealing with it, because by that time, we will see this stuff in action. Like how did the target change? Because MDT's target's gonna change. And our targets are gonna change. And how it's really gonna look in the end, I couldn't tell you because I don't know what's gonna happen next year. And it seems to me like we've had a number of incapacitating and fatal crashes here lately. So it's kind of crazy. So for the CTSP, we'll worry about that when the update comes up. And everything, we'll have the public process and all of that, and you'll be informed. And this is really a precursor to the methods that we're going to be using to that update.
So my question really is, though, is this chart accurate? I think it has an error in its math. It should be 11% on the side, not 0.11.
Yeah, I'll have to
with
look
no
at that.
percent.
I apologize.
Yeah,
Just move the decimal 2 places on
Right.
that last column.
that last column is just off. I just want it to be reflected correctly in our stuff.
So if the motion passes, we'll assume that it includes that correction or verification. Okay. Further discussion?
So just one more point on that. I don't know why our local target for the fatality rate would be less than the state local target for fatality rate reduction. I think we show a 2% fatality rate reduction, and the state shows a 4.3%. And I don't know, I could imagine us having greater goals for these measures, but I don't know why we'd do less.
It has to do with the VMT scale, because they're working in billions. The 100 million, expand that out. They're working with billions of VMTs when we're looking at 100 millions. So I forget, like 4 billion VMT statewide. I don't know if you recall that off the top of your head, but if we're looking at 750 million, the numbers are just out of whack. That's why I'm saying look at the annual reduction instead of looking at the annual reduction percentage or any of that, because what we're looking for is a reduction period. And that's going to help support the statewide goals or targets.
I didn't follow any of that, but because the part that I thought we were doing with rates was adjusting for 100 million VMT. So the rate actually ought to be exactly comparable to even across scales, I think. And it feels like our goal ought to be to support the state. We ought to do at least as well as they're doing. And I don't get why we'd have a lesser rate. I think it's just an artifact of the math that's, based on our trend line. And I guess maybe our trend line, I don't know. Maybe the math is wrong in there somewhere, but in any case,
I'll send you a spreadsheet, Don, if you'd like.
I don't really want to, but I think the mayor was right. I'm ready to vote. I'm just making these points.
Yeah. Sometimes with my day job with transit, there are federally mandated data outputs that have very little bearing on reality. That and I think the mayor is right that as long as our guiding principles of achieving Vision Zero are front of mind in every roadway design project and in every safety project, that's our guiding principle. And to the extent that these data can reflect that in a way that is comprehensible, that's excellent. I'll leave it at that. Is there public comment on this item? Can you come on up to the microphone?
Thanks. Bert Caldwell from Bonner, and didn't anticipate actually saying anything here today. Just wanted to sit and listen. The charts are good, and I think MacArthur's got a point that when you do percentages, you're normalizing various different data from a different scale. There possibly is a difference in eastern Montana and western Montana that would account for a difference in scale, or a difference in the math. But the world I came from before I moved to Missoula, which was an interesting world, not to say Missoula's not, okay? When we had a chart, and the charts here, by the way, I think are pretty good, but when we did projections and we had targets or goals, we had an action plan to do that, to take care of it and to get to it, not working from after the fact data, but a plan to affect the data and going forward. And I didn't hear any of that here today. I didn't hear a plan. I heard we will react. And that's the only way we're going to get the data down is reacting. I don't see that. Sorry.
So that, and my understanding of that is that that'll be addressed through the community transportation safety plan as well as through our long-range transportation plan. So I don't think that that's absent. I just think that's not part of the targets in front of you.
Okay, I just didn't hear it, and I wanted to express that I didn't hear it.
No, it's a good observation, and I that is part of our process. But Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's not explicitly in this action today.
That totally has to do with the community transportation safety plan,
okay,
where we do take a proactive approach.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Good.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comment? Okay. Further committee discussion? All right. On the motion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And opposed, no? Okay, that motion passes. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you. Happy holidays, everybody.
Same to you. Thanks. We have just a closing comment that we have a joint TTAC and TPCC meeting on January 16th that will include a transportation improvement amendment, a unified planning work program amendment, and a presentation on airport expansion plans, as well as a presentation from HDR on the Brook Street development. Are there any additional announcements or closing comments? Okay, I'd like to thank Dick and Garen, for both of you, for your service, and wish you well. And as the mayor said, there's nothing to preclude you from spending your third Tuesday with us in the future. Without anything further, we'll be adjourned.